Erev Tov. This week's parsha, in the count of the Jewish people, the Torah listed for us the names of the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. So this raises the question, what purpose does it serve to know those names? When we speak of the names of the Avos, so we have to know who founded the people. We have to know the character traits of those people. But here, we have 12 names without any character traits. And the Torah does not give us any reason as to why these were their names. When the tribes of Israel were born to our mothers, to Leah and Rachel and Bilhah and Zilpah, every one of them had a reason for the name. And the Torah says what the reason was. So that's understandable, therefore, that the names came to teach us something. But here, it's 24 names out of the blue. And names that are, many of the names are familiar to us throughout the generations. Many of the names never exist again. So what is involved here in the names that the Torah mentions for us regarding the count of the Jewish people? So there are various ideas that are advanced. One idea is that all of the names mean something, even if we don't know what it means. But it means something. So many of the names we can figure out. Nachshon ben Aminadab, so Aminadab, we know he volunteers for his people. Nachshon is like a serpent, a great python. But many of the names don't have any connection to anything. But nevertheless, the Torah mentions the names because from the name you're supposed to be able to deduce the character of the person, which should teach us the character of people that were meant to be the leaders of the tribes of Israel. And therefore, you find in the Medrash extraordinary drashot, interpretations of all of the names. The Medrash tries to look behind the name to see what it represented. And that becomes an exercise, so to speak, in surmising what the names were. It's interesting that in many of the names, all the Hebrew names have some reference to the Borei Olam. They have a reference to God. And that because of the fact that that's in the name, so every time you called the person, you really were saying that God created the person, which is something that we should bear in mind. That's one way of looking at it, one stream in the Meforshim. There's another one which the Gemara says that one of the reasons that the Jewish people were able to be redeemed from Egypt and to rise to the level of Kabbalat Torah at Har Sinai is Shaloshinu es Shmom, that they did not change their names. And the Gemara and the Medrash give us examples. All of the examples are of Roman names because that's the society they lived in. And therefore, the Gemara says they didn't Roman or Greek names. They didn't call Elazar Lucas. Now, Lucas, which is a Greek name that didn't exist in the time of the Egyptians. But the Gemara is speaking about its time. It's speaking about the fact that having, so to speak, a Jewish name is one method of survival as a Jew. But if one has a name that is completely non-Jewish, that doesn't identify oneself as being with one of the tribes of Israel, so then that was viewed as being something that was very perilous. Now, throughout the long exile of the Jewish people, we picked up a lot of names. And many of the names are not Jewish names. They are names that came from the outside. But when a name from the outside came into the Jewish world, the Jewish people somehow converted it. They made it a Jewish name. I told you, for instance, that the name Schneur is really the Spanish word señor. And the woman's name, Sprinza, is the Spanish name Esperanza. And there are many other names like that. Ita, Yuta, and especially Jews that came from Ashkenaz, from Germany. Those were all outside names. But they became Jewish names. And so the ability of a non-Jewish name to become a Jewish name is one of the things that's notable in the exile. So I remember when I grew up as a child in Chicago, so the boys all were called Seymour, which is not a Jewish name. I think there was a Lord Seymour in the United Kingdom who undoubtedly would not have wished that his name be stolen for the Jews. But all of us knew that if you were named Seymour, that's a Jew. And there was a name, Max, right? Other names that are not Jewish, but they are Jewish because you know that's who they are. They were appropriated as being Jewish names. So names that were appropriated to be Jewish names also were the Shaloshinu es Shmom, also had that characteristic that it kept people Jewish. Now you have Jewish names that are double non-Jewish names. For instance, we call somebody Shraga Feivel. Shraga is an Aramaic name meaning fire, light. Feivel is a German contraction. In English, it became Philip. The names go together for some reason. We have many names that go like that. Nosnota etc. But those are all Jewish names because Jewish society has accepted it being such. Now, in our time, there's been a great shift in names, especially here in Israel, where modern Hebrew allows for all sorts of names. And so the question is, does that become a Jewish name? And we find this in halacha, for instance, when you write a ksuba. This happened to me many times in America, but here it happens also. And what's the name of the bride? And, the only name she knows is Shoam. What kind, So what do you say to that? So the question in halacha arises how to write the name. What are the names? And that becomes a generational thing. For instance, in the English-speaking world, the names that were common 50, 60 years ago don't exist today. Nobody names a girl Ethel today. Right? Today it's, much more flowery. So what does that do to the fact Shaloshinu as Shmon? Well, that's the origin amongst the Ashkenazim and amongst the Sephardim as well, to name after an ancestor. The Sephardim name after living ancestors. They're not afraid of the Ayin Hara. I guess if you live in a hot climate, you're protected. The Ashkenazi name after only deceased relatives. But it became a fixture. I've attended a number of britot in my career, and I find that the differences that exist in the disputes that exist within families when it comes to the names are very, very bitter. I remember a set of grandparents whom I knew very well, and they wanted the boy to be named after someone on their side of the family, and the other side of the family prevailed, and the boy was named after the other side of the family. And the grandmother said to me, "This is the worst day of my life." And I told her, "Get hold of yourself. Just think of what you just said." But people are emotional about names. They're possessive about names. And therefore it has a deep-rooted psychological impact upon us, whether, no matter how logical a being we think we are. So when the Torah mentioned all of these names, so one stream adds to the thing by saying the Torah here throws in another 24 Jewish names that you could use. In case you don't have enough names, so here's another. You don't want Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, so here's others. And we will find later, again in Chumash Bamidbar, another 24 different names. And then in Tanakh, you find different names. So the names are there in order to create a culture, to create a protective wall. And if you're called by your Jewish name, so that's one of the things that we see when in the trend of assimilation, especially in the exile, that people change their names. There's an old bad joke that I'm going to conclude with, but it illustrates it. That there was a Jew that made a lot of money, and he called himself C.O. Stanton. And he's walking down the street, and somebody from the old neighborhood recognizes him from 40 years ago. And he says, "Hi, Mosher, how are you?" And he goes, "Shh, that's not my name. My name is C.O. Stanton." So he says, "What's C.O. Stanton?" He said, "Well, I was born on Stanton Street." So he says, "So what's C.O.?" He says, "That's Corner Orchard." But that's how people are. You can change your name, but you can't change everything. And the Torah wanted to emphasize that to us. And therefore, we have the list of all of these glorious names. And many of them reverberate throughout Jewish history. Just one last point. We find that amongst Chazal, there were Tanoim that were named for Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva's Chavrusa is Rabbi Yishmael, which at first glance really strikes us strange. There's nobody that was named Asaph. And there were Jews that were named Noah, not originally Jewish either. So the Meforshim won't comment upon that was part of the bracha that the Rabbanu Shalom gave to Avram Avinu, that Yishmael became a kosher name too. Ki Yishmael Shmaticha. I heard the name Yishmael and I listened to it. It's good. But in our world, Yishmael is not too popular. We don't hear those types of names. And therefore, it's really a very broad and deep subject regarding names in the Jewish world. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash, Yomer Ratzak HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakot Yisrael, L'Fichach Chir B'Lahem Torah Mitzvos Shenemar, Adonai Chapei Tzemam Tzidko Yagdil Torah Yadir.